Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey, not to the dusty battlefields or the solemn temples of ancient Rome, but straight into the heart of their social scene. Imagine this: the sun has set over a magnificent Roman villa. Torches flicker, casting dancing shadows on marble statues, and the air is filled with the murmur of voices, the faint strains of music, and an array of pungent, unfamiliar aromas. You're not just a passive observer, you're a guest at a Roman party, and quickly discover that while it might look grand, it's often far more surprising, and sometimes, frankly bizarre, than anything you've seen in the movies. Forget quiet sophistication. Prepare for extravagance, excess, and possibly some very questionable entertainment. You probably won't survive this without a serious hangover, or at least a story you can never tell in polite company. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in ancient Rome, perhaps during the late Republic or early Imperial period, a guest at the cena, the main evening meal, of a wealthy Roman host. This isn't just dinner. It's a social event, a performance, and often a key networking opportunity. The Romans, known for their discipline and practicality in many aspects of life, also had a profound appreciation for leisure and entertainment, and their parties were an extension of this, often reflecting their host's wealth, status, and sometimes his eccentricities. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer opulence, at least if you're at a high-status gathering. Intricate mosaics gleam underfoot. Frescoed walls depict mythological scenes, and the air might be heavy with exotic perfumes. Enslaved servants, dressed in simple tunics, move silently through the rooms, attending to every need. The sounds are a mix of polite chatter, the clink of glassware or pottery, and the soft strumming of a lyre, or the reedy wail of an aulos, a double reed instrument. But quickly, the facade of elegance begins to reveal something more complex, often less refined. The sheer amount of food, the richness of the wine, and the casual, often explicit, nature of the conversation will soon become apparent. This isn't just about good manners. It's about display, about conspicuous consumption, and sometimes about pushing boundaries. One mainstream historical fact that utterly redefines what you might expect is that Roman parties, particularly those hosted by the wealthy elite, were often highly elaborate. Multi-course dinner parties, seen characterized by lavish food, copious wine consumption, though often diluted, and a range of entertainment that could vary from intellectual discussion to explicit performances, reflecting the host's social status and values. These events were far more than just a meal. They were social and political spectacles. A particularly quirky tidbit that sets the tone for these gatherings is the Roman emphasis on convivium, the art of dining together. It wasn't just about eating. It was about the shared experience, the conversation, the witty remarks, and the social bonds forged around the dining couch. Imagine going to a dinner party where your social standing and future political prospects could genuinely hinge on how clever your small talk is, or how well you can tell a joke. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite's pursuit of increasingly extravagant and sometimes bizarre banquets was primarily a genuine expression of refined tastes and sophisticated culinary arts, or if it was predominantly a form of competitive display and conspicuous consumption, designed to showcase wealth and power to rivals and social climbers. Was it about pleasure, or about status that drove such extravagance. As you're ushered into the dining room, you notice the unique seating arrangement. No chairs around a table as you know it. Instead, you see low, rectangular dining couches, or triclinia, arranged in a U-shape around a central, low table. This is where you'll spend the next several hours, reclining rather than sitting, preparing for a long evening of feasting, drinking, and sometimes unexpected surprises. The air is already growing warmer, the aromas stronger, and the sense of anticipation is palpable. You quickly realize that this is just the beginning of a fascinating and occasionally bizarre plunge into Roman revelry. As you settle into your new surroundings, the initial impressions of opulence deepen, and you realize that the evening is just beginning. This is the dinner party grand, long, the quintessential form of Roman socializing, where a meal wasn't just about sustenance, but a carefully choreographed event designed for prolonged feasting, intricate conversation, and a display of the host's wealth and social standing. You quickly learn that Roman parties aren't quick affairs. They are marathon sessions of indulgence, stretching for hours, often well into the night, demanding endurance from both guests and the army of enslaved servants. It's like attending a very formal, very drawn-out banquet that doubles as a networking event, and you can't leave until the host is ready. You recline on your triclinium dining couch, propped up on your left elbow, facing the central low table. The atmosphere is initially one of polite formality, as guests are arranged according to social status, with the most honored guests nearest the host. The murmur of conversation is low, and enslaved servants move silently, preparing for the first course. This isn't a come-and-go affair. Once the guests arrive and the meal begins, you are expected to stay for the duration, engaging fully in the social spectacle. The evening is structured, often loosely. Around three main courses, the gustatio appetizers, the primae mensae main courses, and the secundae mensae desserts. But these aren't simple courses. Each can involve multiple dishes, presented with increasing fanfare. The time between dishes can be lengthy, filled with conversation, entertainment, or simply waiting, giving the party a deliberate, unhurried pace. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the social significance of these gatherings is that Roman dinner parties sine for the elite were elaborate, multi-course affairs that could last for many hours, serving as crucial social and political arenas where alliances were forged, reputations were made or broken, and displays of wealth and taste were paramount. These were not just meals, they were carefully planned demonstrations of power and influence. Think about it. A bad party could actually hurt your career. Imagine the anticipation as the first course, the gustatio, is presented. It might consist of olives, hard-boiled eggs, small salads, or other light bites, often served with a starter wine, the mulsum wine sweetened with honey. This course is meant to whet the appetite, not fill you up, preparing your palate for the extravagance to come. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman dinner parties is the sheer number of courses and the often bizarre presentation of dishes. Hosts would often try to outdo each other with novelty and extravagance, sometimes serving dishes disguised to look like something else entirely, or presenting live animals as part of the initial spectacle before they were cooked. Imagine being served a dish that looks exactly like a raw pig, but is actually made of elaborate pastry, or a bird that appears to be alive but is stuffed with something else entirely. Historians still argue whether the extreme culinary extravagance and theatricality seen in some Roman accounts like those from Petronius's Satyricon were representative of actual common practice among the elite. or if they were largely exaggerated literary caricatures intended to satirize the excesses of their time, making it difficult to fully grasp the average elite Roman party. Was it real decadence or satirical hyperbole that dominated the Roman dining scene? The main courses, the prima mensae, would be the longest and most substantial part of the meal. Here, the host would showcase his culinary prowess and his ability to procure exotic ingredients. Dishes would be brought out sequentially, perhaps one elaborate platter at a time, each accompanied by exclamations of delight or polite murmurs from the guests. There's no rush, no pressure to finish quickly. The goal is enjoyment and conversation. Throughout the meal, wine often diluted with water. We'll get to that later, flows freely, encouraging lively discussion and loosening inhibitions. Enslaved servants are constantly circulating, refilling cups, bringing new dishes, and attending to every need. Their presence is constant, yet they are expected to be unobtrusive, almost invisible. The sheer duration of these parties, sometimes lasting from late afternoon well into the early hours of the morning, meant that conversation would range widely, from politics and philosophy to gossip and bawdy jokes. No topic was off limits, especially as the evening progressed and the wine took hold. These prolonged interactions were vital for networking, for building relationships, and for subtly assessing the social standing of your fellow guests. You feel the comfortable cushions of the triclinium beneath you, the warmth of the room, and the subtle shift in the atmosphere as the evening deepens. You find yourself engaging in conversations that ebb and flow, punctuated by the arrival of new dishes and the laughter of fellow revelers. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't that they were terrible, it's that they were an overwhelming, multi-sensory experience that demanded significant social stamina and a willingness to fully immerse yourself in a culture of structured indulgence, all designed to showcase the power and sophistication of your host in a grand, long, and unforgettable display of Roman revelry. As you continue your immersion into the Roman dinner party, one immediate and persistent detail will demand your full attention, potentially causing discomfort or even embarrassment if you're not prepared. Dining position, reclining comfort. Forget sitting upright at a table, the standard, polite, and most comfortable way for Romans at least. Male citizens and some privileged women to eat a formal meal was to recline on specialized couches. You quickly learn that mastering this posture is essential not just for etiquette, but for actually consuming your food without making a mess, turning the simple act of eating into a complex balancing act. It's like being at a very formal picnic where everyone is lying down, and you have to gracefully eat a multi-course meal without spilling anything on your tunic. You've been ushered into the triclinium, the dining room, where 3 low yet rectangular couches are arranged in a U-shape around a central, low table. Each couch, or lectus triclinaris, is typically wide enough for 3 people, hence the tri in triclinium. You're assigned your spot, often determined by social hierarchy, with the guest of honor usually on the left couch, nearest the host. You tentatively position yourself, propping yourself up on your left elbow, your body stretched out horizontally, leaning forward to reach the table. This is the posture of Roman elegance, but it feels incredibly awkward to your modern sensibilities. Your left arm, you quickly discover, becomes your primary support. Your right hand is free to reach for food and drink from the low table. Your legs are stretched out behind you, perhaps covered by a blanket or simply resting on the couch. This reclining position was not just about comfort. It was deeply ingrained in Roman social ritual, a mark of leisure and sophistication. differentiating the free citizen at ease from the enslaved individual standing and serving. One mainstream historical fact that utterly redefines our understanding of Roman dining etiquette is that elite Romans primarily ate their formal dinner parties sine, while reclining on U-shaped couches. Triclinia, propped on their left elbows, reaching for food with their right hand, a posture that symbolized leisure and distinguished them from lower social classes and enslaved individuals who often ate sitting or standing. This reclining position was a fundamental aspect of their dining culture. Imagine trying to cut meat or spear a slippery olive while balancing on one elbow. It requires a surprising amount of core strength and coordination. Your non-dominant hand, your left, is essentially out of commission for eating, purely a support. You might find yourself shifting uncomfortably, trying to find a stable position that doesn't put undue strain on your elbow or back. The cushions, while probably plush for a wealthy host, don't offer the full ergonomic support you're used to. A particularly quirky tidbit about reclining dining is that it sometimes led to peculiar challenges for both guests and hosts, particularly during the more indulgent phases of the party. Spills were common, and for less graceful diners, it could be a messy affair. Imagine trying to gracefully handle a bowl of runny stew while lying on your side, hoping not to dribble any on your toga. Historians still argue whether the physiological effects of reclining while eating, by slowing down digestion or encouraging overeating due to comfort, inadvertently contributed to some of the digestive issues or perceived excesses of Roman banquets, or if the posture was simply a cultural norm that the Roman body adapted to without significant health consequences beyond simple indigestion. Did it lead to gluttony, or just relaxed dining? Servants, usually enslaved individuals, move around the low table, refilling cups, presenting dishes, and assisting guests who might struggle to reach items. Their presence, standing over the reclining diners, further emphasizes the stark social hierarchy. They are literally looking down on the masters, yet serving them in this position of ultimate repose. The design of the triclinium itself could also vary. For some hosts, the couches might be simple, sturdy wooden frames with cushions. For others, they could be elaborate, inlaid with precious materials, draped with fine fabrics, reflecting the host's immense wealth. The very cushions you recline on might be stuffed with feathers or straw, offering varying degrees of comfort. Conversation flows around the table, punctuated by laughter and the sounds of eating. You participate, your head turned towards your fellow diners, maintaining a posture that suggests ease and sophistication, even if your elbow is slowly going numb. The long duration of the meal. Remember that from the last section, it means hours in this single, semi-reclined position, a testament to your endurance. You feel the slow ache in your left arm, the subtle discomfort in your neck as you turn to speak, and the constant, nagging awareness of your body trying to adapt to this alien way of eating. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about their extravagance. It's about the pervasive, often awkward, reality of their dining position. Reclining was a symbol of comfort and status, but it turned the simple act of eating into a complex physical challenge, a constant reminder that even leisure in ancient Rome demanded a unique kind of uncomfortable mastery. Having mastered the precarious art of reclining for your meal, your attention now turns to the star of the show, the food. And while some dishes are undoubtedly delicious, prepare yourself, because food extravagant, sometimes gross, is the defining characteristic of a Roman party. Forget neatly portioned, aesthetically pleasing plates. Here, you're about to encounter a dizzying array of dishes, some genuinely exotic. others bizarrely conceived, and many frankly repulsive to your modern palate, all designed to impress, shock, and sometimes even confuse the guests. You quickly learn that Roman culinary ambition often outweighed good taste, turning the dining experience into a strange, stomach-churning adventure. It's like being at a very expensive, very weird buffet where the chef is trying to prove how many strange animals he can cook. The first dishes begin to arrive, carried by silent enslaved servants who weave through the reclining guests. The aromas are rich, heavy with spices, and a mixture of roasting meat and pungent sauces. Your host, with a proud gesture, might indicate a particular platter. This isn't just about feeding you. It's about showcasing immense wealth, far-flung trade networks, and the culinary creativity, or perhaps madness, of the host's head cook, the Archimagirus. One mainstream historical fact that utterly redefines our understanding of ancient cuisine is that Roman elite dinner parties often featured incredibly elaborate and extravagant dishes, including exotic meats like dormice, peacocks, flamingos, complex sauces, garum-based. Remember that, from the offal jobs in ancient Rome and food prepared in visually deceptive ways, often prioritizing shock value and novelty over simple palatability. The famous Roman cookbook, Apicius's De Re Coquinaria, details many such recipes. Imagine reading a cookbook that suggests stuffing a pig with live thrushes so they fly out when it's carved. Imagine your surprise as the first appetizer, perhaps a platter of dormice, arrives. These aren't just cute little rodents. They're specially fattened, sometimes in terracotta jars, then roasted or stuffed with nuts and spices. You might tentatively pick one up, a tiny, crisp morsel, wondering if you can actually bring yourself to eat it. It's a delicacy for them, a horror for you. Then come the more elaborate main courses. While roasted pork, beef, and poultry were common, hosts often vied to serve more exotic meats. You might see a peacock, roasted whole, its magnificent feathers reattached for display, or perhaps a flamingo, its tongue considered a delicacy specially prepared. Even ostriches or wild boar could make an appearance, showcasing the host's hunting prowess or his ability to import rare animals. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman party food is the widespread use of garum, that fermented fish sauce. Remember the stench from the awful job section? It was added to almost everything, from savory dishes to even sweet ones. Imagine adding a pungent, salty fish sauce to your honey cake or fruit compote, believing it enhanced the flavor. Historians still argue whether the extreme culinary experiments and combinations described by Roman writers, such as sweet and savory mixes, or very strong spices, truly reflected a sophisticated and adventurous palate, or if they were often used to disguise the taste of less fresh ingredients in an era without refrigeration, or simply to create novel sensations through overwhelming flavors. Was it about refined taste or hiding decay that made food so weird? The presentation itself could be a theatrical performance. Dishes might be served in the shape of animals or mythological creatures. Cakes could be molded to resemble sculptures. Sometimes, even live birds or small animals would be incorporated into a dish, creating a startling effect when carved or served. This wasn't just a meal, it was edible art, designed to shock and awe. The sauces were complex and often heavily spiced, sometimes to disguise the flavor of meat that might not be perfectly fresh. Remember the lack of refrigeration. Garum, as we know, was a key ingredient, giving many dishes a distinctive, pungent, umami flavor that your modern palate might find overwhelming. Spices from across the empire, like pepper, cumin, and coriander, were used generously, their exoticism adding to the dish's allure and cost. For dessert, the secundae mensae, you might find honeyed cakes, fresh fruits if in season, nuts, and sweet pastries. But even here, there could be surprises. Imagine a honey cake shaped like a miniature gladiator's helmet, or a sweet dish infused with an unexpected savory spice. You feel the conflicting sensations, the rich aromas, the challenging textures, the occasional burst of an unfamiliar spice, and the constant mental battle against your modern squeamishness. You might politely decline a dish or take a tiny, experimental bite, only to grimace inwardly. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the long hours. It's about the bizarre, extravagant, and sometimes truly gross food. Your host's desire to impress meant a culinary journey into the unexpected, turning every course into a potential test of your adventurous spirit and your stomach in a dazzling, yet undeniably strange, display of Roman revelry. As the bizarre and extravagant dishes continue to arrive, your thirst grows, and you quickly learn what accompanies every Roman meal, from humble fare to lavish feasts. Drink wine, and more wine. Forget a diverse cocktail menu or a selection of spirits. In ancient Rome, wine was the ubiquitous beverage, consumed constantly, but rarely in the way you might expect. It was often diluted, frequently spiced, and its quality varied wildly, making every sip a fundamental part of the dining experience, but not always a delightful one. You quickly learn that your palate will become intimately familiar with the taste of fermented grapes, often mixed with, well, other things. It's like being at a party where the only drink is wine, and half the time it tastes like a science experiment, and the other half it's just glorified fruit juice. You reach for your cup, a simple ceramic goblet, or, if you're at a grand party, perhaps an ornate silver or glass vessel. The enslaved servant, ever attentive, pours from a large amphora. The liquid is a deep red or amber color, but you immediately notice that it's not pure. Water is added, often in varying proportions. This wasn't because Romans disliked strong wine. It was a deeply ingrained cultural practice, believed to be a mark of civilization. Drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric, the practice of Scythians or other uncivilized peoples. One mainstream historical fact that fundamentally redefines Roman drinking habits is that Romans almost universally diluted their wine with water before consumption, believing it to be a mark of civilization and moderation, with the ratio varying, and often flavored it with spices, honey, or even lead unknowingly, making the taste quite different from modern wines. Drinking pure wine was largely frowned upon and associated with barbarism or drunkenness. Imagine sipping a wine that's half water, sometimes more. The flavor is lighter, less intense, but it also means you can drink much more of it over the course of a long dinner party without quickly becoming incapacitated. The wine itself, stored in large clay amphorae, would vary widely in quality based on its origin, age, and storage conditions. Some might be sweet, others dry. Many probably fairly acidic or oxidized by modern standards due to the lack of perfect sealing methods. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman wine consumption is the deliberate addition of various flavorings, often to improve or alter the taste of less palatable wines. This could include spices like pepper, cinnamon, or myrrh, or even pine resin, creating a taste similar to modern Greek retsina, and, disturbingly, sometimes lead acetate, known as sapa or defrutum. Boiled grape must that was concentrated in lead-lined pots. This lead acetate acted as a sweetener and preservative, but unknowingly contributed to chronic lead poisoning among the Roman elite. Imagine sweetening your wine with a silent, insidious poison, believing it made it better. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of lead in Roman food and wine preparation contributed significantly to the perceived intellectual decline or various ailments among the Roman elite. Remember that from the water supply section in Pompeii, or if the overall impact was less severe than sometimes theorized, due to factors like varying individual exposure and the diluting effects of other dietary elements. Did it kill off Roman genius, or was its effect overblown? Beyond formal meals, wine was consumed throughout the day, often diluted even further. It was seen as a safer alternative to untreated water. Remember how contaminated Roman water could be, from the "why travel sucked" segment, as the fermentation process could kill some pathogens. So, your primary source of hydration might often be very weak, watered-down wine. For those who preferred something stronger, or during particularly wild revelries, the dilution might be less, or even ignored altogether, leading to genuine intoxication. But for a formal dinner party, the focus was on prolonged social drinking, not necessarily getting roaring drunk right away. The host, or a designated master of the feast, arbiter bibendi, might even dictate the precise ratio of wine to water, controlling the pace of consumption and the level of sobriety or lack thereof. You feel the familiar warmth spread through your body with each sip of the diluted, spiced wine. You notice its often cloudy appearance, or the subtle sediment at the bottom of your cup. You might find the taste a bit strange, perhaps too sweet or too herbaceous for your liking, but you drink it anyway, because it's available, and it's what Romans do. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the food or the long hours. It's about the ubiquitous presence of wine as the primary beverage, often diluted and strangely flavored. Your Roman drinking experience is a constant immersion in a liquid culture far removed from modern sensibilities, making every toast a unique, and sometimes surprisingly unsettling, journey into ancient Roman revelry, where the only option was wine. Wine and more wine, as the wine flows freely, diluted though it may be, and the elaborate courses continue to make their appearance. The Roman dinner party truly comes alive with its varied and often surprising performances. This is the realm of entertainment musicians to midgets. Forget background music or polite parlor games. Roman hosts, eager to impress and entertain, would often parade a dizzying array of performers before their guests, ranging from skilled artists to novelty acts, and sometimes even shocking spectacles designed to provoke a reaction. You quickly learn that, at a Roman party, anything could happen, and the line between sophisticated amusement and crude spectacle is often delightfully or disturbingly blurred. It's like attending a very long, very boozy talent show, where the acts range from a classical symphony to someone doing interpretive dance with a live animal. You recline on your triclinium, sipping your spiced wine, your senses already somewhat dulled by the food and drink. Suddenly, the murmuring conversation might dim as a new set of enslaved servants enters, preparing the space for a performance. The host, with a proud gesture, indicates the entertainment. This is a crucial part of the convivium, designed not just to amuse, but to reflect the host's wealth, taste, and connections. One mainstream historical fact that utterly expands our understanding of ancient Roman parties is that Roman elite dinner parties frequently featured diverse forms of entertainment, including live music, flute players, lyre players, poets reciting verses, dancers, acrobats, comedians, and even gladiatorial mock fights or the display of unusual individuals like dwarves or those with physical deformities, all serving to amuse and impress the guests. The nature and quality of the entertainment varied widely based on the host's preferences and budget. Imagine the sounds. Perhaps a flute player Tibetan begins a melancholic melody on an aulos, its reedy notes filling the room, accompanying a lyrical recitation by a poet, or a lyre player Citharista strums gentle chords, providing background music for conversation. These are the more refined forms of entertainment, showcasing cultural appreciation and artistic skill. The music might be complex or simple, designed to set a mood or underscore a philosophical discussion. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman party entertainment is the sometimes bizarre and unexpected nature of the performances. Some hosts might feature acrobats performing incredible feats of agility amidst the dining couches, or even have trained animals like monkeys or dogs performing tricks. For more transgressive tastes, mock gladiatorial combats could be staged, sometimes even involving real blood, blurring the lines between dinner party and arena. Imagine trying to gracefully recline and eat while someone is doing backflips right over your head, or watching two people pretend to stab each other with sharpened sticks just a few feet away from your dormouse appetizer. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of physically unusual individuals like dwarves or those with deformities as entertainment at elite Roman parties was primarily a form of crude, cruel exploitation, reflecting the dehumanizing aspects of Roman society and the power dynamic over enslaved people, or if there was also a complex cultural fascination with the unique and the exotic, making these individuals, albeit tragically, a source of morbid curiosity and sometimes even a strange form of celebrity. Was it pure cruelty or complex curiosity that drove such displays? As the evening progresses and the wine takes hold, the entertainment might become less refined and more daring. Comedians might perform bawdy skits, their jokes often explicit and crude, eliciting raucous laughter from the increasingly uninhibited guests. Dancers, sometimes scantily clad, might perform provocative routines, their movements becoming more suggestive as the night wore on. This reflects the Roman party's trajectory from formal civility to relaxed indulgence, where social norms loosened significantly with each passing hour and each refilled cup. For the truly extravagant host, the entertainment could be shocking. Displays of unusual individuals, such as dwarves or people with physical deformities, might be paraded for curiosity or amusement, a chilling reminder of the era's casual cruelty and the exploitation of the marginalized. Some hosts, eager to outdo their rivals, might even stage elaborate theatrical scenes or bring in exotic animals for display, their purpose purely to shock and impress. You feel the shifting moods of the party, from polite appreciation to boisterous laughter, and occasionally, a nervous, uncomfortable silence. You witness the range of human entertainment, from the beautiful artistry of a musician to the unsettling spectacle of a forced performance. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the food and drink. It's about the surprising, sometimes shocking, entertainment. Your host's desire to amaze and entertain meant a constant stream of performances, turning your dining experience into an unpredictable, multifaceted spectacle, where the sublime and the disturbing often sat side by side, all designed to showcase the vast wealth and boundless, often bizarre, tastes of your Roman host. As the evening deepens and the wine continues to flow, your Roman dinner party transitions into its most fluid and revealing phase. Conversation philosophy to filth. Forget polite small talk restricted to weather and politics. at a Roman party, especially among elite men. The range of discussion was astonishingly broad, swinging from profound philosophical debates to the crudest of jokes and explicit sexual anecdotes, often within the same breath. You quickly learn that inhibition loosens significantly with each passing hour, and that no topic is truly off-limits, making every exchange a potential plunge into unexpected intellectual depths or shocking vulgarity. It's like being at a very intellectual college frat party, where one moment you're discussing Aristotle, and the next, someone is telling a ridiculously inappropriate story about a donkey. You recline on your couch, your ears tuned to the ebb and flow of voices around you. Your fellow guests, perhaps a mix of senators, poets, wealthy merchants, and military commanders, engage in lively discourse. The initial formality, remember that from Section 2, has largely dissipated, replaced by a more relaxed, uninhibited atmosphere. The presence of enslaved servants, moving silently through the room, seems to have no bearing on the freedom of speech. They are invisible ears, their discretion presumed. One moment, you might find yourself engaged in a discussion about the Stoic philosophy of enduring hardship, or the latest political maneuverings in the Senate, with guests eloquently quoting Cicero or debating the virtues of imperial rule. The conversation can be intellectual, sophisticated, and deeply engaging, reflecting the Roman elite's appreciation for rhetoric, learning, and civic life. You might hear discussions on astronomy, history, or the latest philosophical treatise from Greece. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this intellectual freedom is that Roman dinner parties for the elite were key venues for intellectual discourse, where guests engaged in lively debates on philosophy, politics, literature, and current events, often showcasing their rhetorical skills and learning, reflecting the importance of intellectual conversation in Roman social life. These were not just social gatherings, but also intellectual proving grounds. But then, with astonishing swiftness, the topic might swerve. A witty remark about a political rival could devolve into a crude personal insult. A philosophical discussion could suddenly veer into a bawdy joke about a public figure's sexual habits. The polite veneer peels away, revealing a Roman appetite for ribaldry and explicit humor that would shock modern sensibilities, especially in a mixed company setting. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman party conversation is the prevalence of explicit sexual jokes and anecdotes, even from respected figures. These weren't whispered. They were often shouted with laughter, featuring graphic descriptions of various sexual acts, preferences, and the exploits of both men and women. Imagine a senator, famous for his eloquent speeches, suddenly launching into a detailed, crude story about a night in a brothel, and everyone just laughing along. Historians still argue whether the apparent frankness and explicit nature of Roman party conversation, particularly concerning sex and bodily functions, reflects a genuinely more open and less prudish society than later Christian cultures, or if it primarily indicates a specific form of male bonding and social display among the elite, where vulgarity served as a way to assert masculinity, power, and disregard for conventional morality among peers. Was it genuine openness, or a show of bravado and power? No topic seemed truly taboo, especially as the evening progressed and the diluted wine began to take full effect. Remember that from Section 5, gossip, both personal and political, flowed freely. Details of scandals, love affairs, financial woes, and physical imperfections were exchanged with relish. You might hear graphic descriptions of surgical procedures though perhaps less gross than actually witnessing them. Like in the medical care section of ancient Egypt, or crude comments about the appearances of enslaved servants. The conversational flow was often unstructured, leaping from one subject to another without warning. One moment, someone is reciting lines from Virgil. The next, they're complaining about the price of garum. Remember that pungent fish sauce from our awful job section. And then, perhaps, someone makes a sexually explicit comment about a rival's wife. Your social survival depends on your ability to quickly adapt, to contribute appropriately, and to not show discomfort, even when the conversation delves into territory that would make your modern ears burn. The presence of enslaved servants during these conversations, constantly refilling cups and bringing dishes, seemed to be entirely ignored. They were considered invisible, unhearing, their discretion taken for granted, even when the conversation was highly sensitive or explicitly sexual. This further highlights the deep power imbalance within the Roman household. You feel the intoxicating mix of intellectual stimulation and crude amusement, your mind constantly shifting gears to keep up. You learn to laugh at the crass jokes, to nod sagely at the philosophical pronouncements, and to feign indifference to the more scandalous gossip. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the food and entertainment. It's about the unfiltered, often shocking, range of conversation. Your Roman party experience is a constant immersion in a verbal landscape where profound thought and explicit vulgarity coexisted, making every exchange a surprising, sometimes unsettling, glimpse into the uninhibited minds of the Roman elite, leaving you both intellectually stimulated and slightly scandalized. As the lavish courses continue to parade before you, and the wine-fueled conversation oscillates wildly between philosophy and filth, a notorious, often repeated, myth about Roman parties might creep into your mind: the vomitorium myth versus reality. Forget the popular image of Romans gorging themselves, then retiring to a special room to vomit and make space for more food. This sensationalized notion is largely a historical misunderstanding, though the reality of Roman overindulgence and its less glamorous consequences certainly existed. You quickly learn that while Romans indulged, they weren't quite as grossly systematic about their purging as legend suggests. It's like being at a party where everyone assumes there's a special designated room for throwing up, when in reality, if it happens, it's just in a bush out back, or perhaps a chamber pot. You might be eyeing a particularly rich dish, perhaps roasted dormouse, or a bizarre concoction of exotic bird tongues. Remember those from Section 4's Food Extravagant, sometimes gross. And the thought crosses your mind, how do they eat all this? That's when the modern myth of the vomitorium, a designated room for purging, might pop into your head. You look around, perhaps discreetly searching for a hidden doorway, a discreet exit, but you won't find one, because such a room, used for that purpose, largely didn't exist. The term vomitorium is real, but it has a completely different meaning. One mainstream historical fact that utterly debunks this persistent myth is that the Roman vomitorium was actually an architectural feature of amphitheaters and theaters, a series of wide, vaulted passages and entrances designed for large crowds to quickly and efficiently exit or spew forth from the building, not a place for intentional purging during banquets. The misunderstanding arose from a misinterpretation of Latin texts centuries later. So, no, Romans didn't have a specific room dedicated to throwing up after too much food. Imagine being told that the Colosseum had vomitoria and thinking it was for spectators who ate too many hot dogs. It was simply about crowd control. The passages were wide, well-engineered, and allowed thousands of people to exit rapidly, creating the impression of a crowd vomiting forth from the structure. The idea of linking this architectural term to elite dining habits is a much later, largely inaccurate embellishment. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman indigestion and how they did deal with it is that while purposeful purging in a designated room was not a regular practice, Romans certainly experienced indigestion and overindulgence. Wealthy Romans sometimes used emetic substances that induce vomiting for medicinal purposes or to simply relieve discomfort. But this was a private act, not a social one performed in a designated vomitorium. Imagine taking a medicine to make yourself throw up, but it's done discreetly in your own home, not as a social ritual at a party. Historians still argue whether the persistent popularity of the vomitorium myth, despite historical evidence to the contrary, reflects a modern fascination with ancient Roman excess and depravity, allowing for a more sensationalized narrative, or if it stems from a misinterpretation of ancient literary accounts that did occasionally mention individuals purging themselves discreetly due to gluttony, which was then exaggerated into a formal practice. Was it about moralizing history or misinterpreting texts? However, that doesn't mean Romans didn't overeat. On the contrary, lavish parties, with their multiple courses and rich dishes, often led to gluttony. Guests would indulge, sometimes to the point of discomfort. While a formal vomitorium was a myth, the consequences of overindulgence were real. If a guest felt unwell, they would discreetly excuse themselves, perhaps to a private chamber or a garden, to relieve themselves away from the public eye. The scene would be one of polite discomfort, not open purging. An enslaved servant might quietly fetch a chamber pot if needed, or assist a guest who felt faint. The point was to maintain an air of sophistication, even amidst the indulgence. Public displays of bodily functions were generally considered uncouth, even for Romans known for their less inhibited approach to certain topics. Remember that conversation about filth? You continue to recline, perhaps feeling a slight queasiness yourself from the rich food and diluted wine. You keep a discreet eye on your fellow guests, noticing if anyone quietly excuses themselves, but you don't see any open acts of purging. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't that they had a designated vomitorium. It's that their indulgence was just as real, and the consequences just as unpleasant, even without the mythical purging room. Your Roman party experience confirms that while some myths are more entertaining than reality, the uncomfortable truth of human overindulgence and its messy aftermath is a universal constant, even in the grandest of ancient Roman revelries. As the multi-course meal continues and the diluted wine ensures conversation remains lively, another common, often illicit, aspect of Roman parties might emerge: games and gambling dice and debauchery. Forget polite card games or quiet chess. Roman revelry often included widespread, fervent betting, particularly with dice, turning elegant dining rooms into temporary dens of chance, where fortunes could be won or lost, and inhibitions quickly dissolved. You quickly learn that even in the refined atmosphere of an elite Roman villa, the thrill of a wager was irresistible, transforming guests into eager, often unruly, gamblers. It's like being at a high-stakes casino night, but everyone is also very, very drunk, and there's no security to break up fights. You might notice a lull in the formal entertainment, or a shift in the conversation, as a small group of guests gathers around a low table, their eyes fixed on a handful of tumbling cubes. The clatter of dice, the sharp intake of breath, and the sudden exclamations of delight or despair punctuate the evening. While some forms of betting were tolerated, widespread, organized gambling for money was officially frowned upon and even prohibited by Roman law. Yet it thrived discreetly in private settings like these parties. The allure of chance was simply too strong. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the pervasive nature of this illicit activity is that despite Roman laws often prohibiting organized gambling for money, especially dice games, betting was extremely popular among all social classes and frequently occurred at private parties and taverns, with archaeologists finding numerous dice, gaming boards, and evidence of widespread gambling across the Roman Empire. This demonstrates a significant gap between legal statutes and actual social practice. Imagine a law that everyone just ignored, especially when there was a chance to get rich or poorer. Imagine the games. Most common were dice games, often played with 3 dice tally or tesserae, where players would bet on various combinations or on who could roll the highest sum. Elaborate gaming boards, sometimes resembling simplified backgammon, might also be brought out. The stakes could range from small sums of coin to significant amounts of money, property, or even, in extreme cases, the freedom of an enslaved person. Though this was more common in dedicated gambling dens, not typically at a private party. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the lengths to which Roman gamblers would go and how cheating was inherent is the archaeological discovery of loaded dice in Roman sites, weighted to favor certain numbers. Imagine playing a friendly game of dice, only to find out your opponent literally had a cheat code built into his equipment. Historians still argue whether the Roman state's persistent attempts to prohibit or regulate gambling were primarily a moral crusade against idleness and vice, seeking to maintain social order and traditional Roman virtues, or if it was also a pragmatic effort to control financial flows and prevent the dissipation of wealth through unproductive means, especially among the elite who might squander fortunes. Was it about virtue or about economic stability that outlawed the dice? As the night progressed and the wine flowed, the gambling would become more intense, the wagers larger, and the atmosphere more charged. Drunken arguments might erupt over a disputed roll, voices rising in anger, sometimes leading to shoving matches or even drawn daggers, though rarely at truly elite parties, where decorum, however strained, was usually maintained. The host, or a designated master of the feast, arbiter bibendi, might intervene to restore order, but the underlying tension would remain. The social dynamics of gambling at parties were complex. It could be a way to establish dominance, to prove one's luck or cunning, or simply a form of entertainment. For some, it was a desperate attempt to win back lost fortunes, leading to deeper financial ruin. The allure of quick riches, however fleeting, was a powerful draw, transforming polite guests into fervent participants in a game of chance. Enslaved servants, constantly moving through the room, would witness these illicit activities, their presence, as always, presumed to be unseen and unheard. They might collect the winnings, or discreetly remove a guest who had lost too much and become unruly. Their role was to facilitate the revelry, no matter how debauched. You feel the thrill of the wager, the sudden rush of adrenaline as the dice tumble, and the immediate elation or despair as they land. You participate, perhaps cautiously at first, then with increasing abandon as the wine dulls your inhibitions. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the food and entertainment. It's about the pervasive, often illicit, inclusion of games and gambling. Your Roman party experience is a plunge into a world where the pursuit of pleasure often included the thrill of chance, transforming dignified gatherings into boisterous, debauched dens of dice and potential ruin, revealing a society that, despite its laws, couldn't resist the seductive lure of a wager. Even as the tables groan under extravagant dishes, the wine flows freely, and the conversations grow boisterous with gambling and entertainment. The true, silent engine driving every Roman party remains largely overlooked. Slaves' invisible workhorses. Forget the seamless magic of modern catering. Every single aspect of a Roman feast, from the preparation of the bizarre food to the serving of endless wine, the cleaning of the inevitable mess, and even the entertainment, was meticulously managed and physically performed by a vast, tireless, and often exploited workforce of enslaved individuals. You quickly realize that the luxury and leisure enjoyed by the Roman elite were built directly on the backs of unfree labor, turning every moment of revelry into a silent testament to systemic dehumanization. It's like being at a magnificent show, only to discover that the entire cast and crew are invisible, unpaid, and utterly exhausted. You notice them moving through the triclinium dining room, their movements silent, efficient, almost ghost-like amidst the animated chatter of the guests. They fill cups, bring new platters, clear away discarded bones, and anticipate every need before it's even voiced. Their simple tunics and shaved heads for male enslaved individuals mark their status, but their presence is so constant, so ubiquitous, that they are rarely truly seen by the guests. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the mechanics of Roman parties is that Roman elite dinner parties and social gatherings were entirely dependent on the extensive labor of enslaved individuals, who performed every task from cooking, serving, and cleaning to providing entertainment, enduring long hours and often harsh conditions, effectively acting as the unseen foundation of Roman leisure and luxury. Their tireless work enabled the very concept of Roman revelry. Imagine the sheer number and specialization of the enslaved individuals required for a grand party. There might be koki cooks laboring in the hot, smoky kitchens. Remember those awful conditions, preparing complex, multi-course meals. There would be tricliniarchy dining room managers overseeing the intricate service, carpenters, carvers expertly dismembering roasted animals at the table, and postulitores, cupbearers constantly refilling wine cups. Beyond the front of house, countless others would be cleaning, hauling water, managing supplies, and tending to the general upkeep of the villa. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the extreme specialization and dehumanization of enslaved labor in wealthy Roman households is the existence of enslaved individuals whose sole job might be to entertain guests during parties, whether as musicians, dancers, or even living centerpieces. Imagine an enslaved person whose entire purpose is to provide fleeting amusement for a wealthy host, their human dignity utterly ignored while they perform their forced role. Historians still argue whether the apparent efficiency and sophistication of Roman household management, particularly for large social events, was primarily due to the sheer quantity and specialization of enslaved labor, making complex tasks feasible without technology, or if it also reflected a pragmatic system of control and incentive, like the promise of manumission that motivated enslaved individuals to perform demanding roles to a high standard, despite their lack of freedom. Was it pure exploitation, or a subtle system of motivation? The labor began long before the guests arrived. Enslaved individuals would spend days, even weeks, preparing for a major cena cleaning and decorating the villa, procuring exotic ingredients, often also involving enslaved labor to transport them, preparing the elaborate dishes, chilling wine using snow brought from mountains, a luxury, and setting up the dining couches. Their work was meticulous, tireless, and utterly unacknowledged in the social hierarchy. During the party itself, their work was constant. They moved through the room with practiced ease, anticipating needs, clearing away messes, and ensuring the smooth flow of the evening. They endured the raucous laughter, the drunken arguments, remember those from the gambling section, and the occasional rude or dismissive gesture from guests, all while maintaining a facade of polite deference. Their long hours stretched well into the night, often continuing long after the last guest had departed. Cleaning up the extensive mess, their presence was so ubiquitous that they became almost invisible, a backdrop to the revelry. Guests would speak freely, even intimately. In their presence, remember the conversations from philosophy to filth, assuming their silence and discretion. This casual disregard for their humanity was a fundamental aspect of the system, allowing the elite to enjoy their luxury without confronting its grim foundation. You see their weary faces as they move silently, a quiet contrast to the boisterousness around them. You notice their quick, efficient hands, their downcast eyes. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about their extravagance or oddities. It's about the pervasive, relentless, and utterly dehumanizing labor of enslaved individuals. Your Roman party experience is a chilling reminder that every indulgence, every moment of leisure, was made possible by the tireless, exploited efforts of those who were considered mere property, the invisible workhorses who powered the empire's grand revelry, receiving no share in the joy they helped create. As the enslaved individuals tirelessly work to keep the party flowing, your attention might shift to another nuanced, often debated aspect of Roman social gatherings. Women's roles varied presence. Forget a single, monolithic image. The participation of women at Roman parties was complex, stratified by social status, marital standing, and the nature of the gathering, ranging from prominent inclusion to polite exclusion, reflecting the intricate social norms of the era. You quickly learned that a Roman party, for women, wasn't a universal experience. It was a carefully navigated social landscape where rules could be strict and expectations profoundly different based on who you were. It's like attending a gathering where some guests are at the main table, some are in a separate salon, and some are literally just invisible. You observe the dining couches. While men recline, you might see some women present. Their seating arrangement can immediately tell you about their status. Respectable Roman matrons, married women of high social standing, could attend dinner parties, particularly those hosted by close family or friends, and would often recline alongside their husbands. However, their presence was often to demonstrate the family's unity and respectability, and their behavior was expected to be exemplary and modest. Their role was to lend an air of decorum, not necessarily to engage in the boisterous revelry of the men. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this distinction is that the participation of Roman women at dinner parties varied significantly by their social status and marital standing. While respectable matrons could attend and recline alongside their husbands, they were expected to maintain modesty, whereas women of lower status, freedwomen, and prostitutes were often present as entertainers or in other roles, facing different social expectations and levels of exploitation. The social rules were far from universal. Imagine the matrona, perhaps your host's wife. She might engage in polite conversation, participate in some of the more refined entertainment, but she would typically avoid the explicit jokes or the intense gambling that might characterize the later stages of the party mixture. Those from Section 7 and 9. Her modesty. her chastity, and her dignified demeanor were paramount to her reputation and that of her family. Her presence served to legitimize the gathering, demonstrating its respectable nature. A particularly quirky tidbit about Roman dinner parties is that women of higher social standing married Roman citizens would typically not recline on the same couch as unrelated men, or at least not in close proximity, to avoid any appearance of impropriety. They might recline on the same couch as their husband or another close family member. This subtle arrangement spoke volumes about social boundaries. Imagine the awkward dance of seating arrangements, meticulously calculated to avoid even the perception of scandal. Historians still argue whether the apparent restrictions on respectable Roman women's public social behavior, including their roles at parties, primarily stemmed from a genuine cultural belief in female modesty and domesticity, or if these norms were more a patriarchal mechanism of social control, limiting women's public agency and influence within a male-dominated society. Was it about virtue or about power that dictated female participation? Then there were other women, those who existed on the fringes of respectable society, or who were part of the entertainment. Female musicians, dancers, and acrobats, remember them from Section 6, would perform. These women were often enslaved or freed women, and their presence carried a different social weight. They were there to serve, to amuse, and sometimes to provide sexual services. Remember the prostitutes from Section 11 of the Awful Jobs script. They might appear at parties too, either openly or discreetly. Their interactions with the male guests were far less constrained by rules of modesty, and they were often subjected to objectification and exploitation. The social dynamics could be stark. While a matrona might engage in polite conversation with a senator, an enslaved female entertainer might be subjected to crude jokes or unwanted advances, with little recourse. Her safety and dignity depended entirely on the whims of the host or the protection of her owner. Her participation was a form of labor, not leisure. Even among women, a clear hierarchy existed. A wealthy widow or a powerful freedwoman might command more respect and freedom than a young, unmarried girl from a less prominent family. Their presence, their attire, and their behavior were all meticulously judged by others, constantly reinforcing the rigid social stratification of Roman society. You observe the women present, noting their positions, their interactions, and the subtle cues that reveal their status. You see the matrons, dignified but somewhat reserved, and perhaps other women, more lively, more daring, their roles entirely different. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't that women were always absent. It's that their presence was highly varied and always dictated by a harsh social hierarchy. Your Roman party experience reveals a complex tapestry of female participation, where some women enjoyed a privileged, if constrained, place, while others were merely performers or commodities. Their roles a stark reminder of the profound differences in dignity and freedom that permeated every aspect of Roman social life, even amidst the grandest revelry. As the last guest finally stumbles out into the Roman dawn, perhaps aided by an enslaved servant or leaning on a weary friend, the vibrant, luxurious atmosphere of the Roman party rapidly dissolves, giving way to a grim and utterly repulsive reality, after-party mess, disgusting aftermath. Forget a few scattered cups and some confetti. The remnants of a lavish Roman banquet were a chaotic, unsanitary, and frankly nauseating tableau of spilled food, broken pottery, and the pervasive stench of stale wine, vomit, and general human indulgence. You quickly learn that the spectacle of Roman revelry came with an inevitable, stomach-churning cleanup. turning a scene of luxury into a true nightmare of filth. It's like discovering that after a grand ball, the entire palace ballroom has been turned into a giant, sticky, and very smelly garbage dump, and someone has to clean it by hand. You survey the dining room, illuminated by the cold, unforgiving light of dawn. The air, which was once filled with exotic perfumes and the aroma of roasted meats, is now thick with the acrid smell of stale wine, the cloying sweetness of rotting fruit, and the unmistakable, pervasive odor of vomit. Bits of food, gnawed bones, discarded fruit peels, remnants of sauces are scattered across the floor, trodden into the mosaic by countless sandals. Cups and platters lie overturned, their contents spilled. Cushions are askew, stained and rumpled. The triclinium couches, where you and your fellow guests reclined in relative comfort, now bear the unfortunate marks of a long night of indulgence. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with the elegance of Roman dining is that after lavish Roman dinner parties, the dining rooms and associated spaces were typically left in a state of considerable disarray and filth, with food scraps, spilled wine, and vomit needing to be manually cleared by enslaved servants, highlighting the lack of sophisticated waste disposal and the sheer scale of indulgence. This messy aftermath was a common, unglamorous reality of elite Roman entertaining. Imagine being the person who has to scrape solidified vomit from intricate mosaic floors before the sun is fully up. Imagine the enslaved servants, weary from a night of ceaseless serving, now faced with this daunting task. They move silently through the mess, their faces impassive, gathering the broken pottery, sweeping up the food scraps, and, most repulsively, wiping up the inevitable puddles of vomit or other bodily fluids that might have accumulated. The cold water they use only partially washes away the grime, and the stench seems to linger in the very stone. A particularly quirky tidbit that reveals the Romans' curious relationship with their own mess is the occasional artistic depiction of unswept floor mosaics, asaroton. These elaborate floor designs would intentionally depict realistic remnants of a banquet, fish bones, fruit peels, nutshells, as if they were scattered on the floor, celebrated as a form of artistic trompe-l'oeil. Imagine decorating your floor with art that looks exactly like a disgusting pile of garbage after a party, making the mess permanent. Historians still argue whether the apparent acceptance or even artistic celebration of such messy depictions indicates a more casual or less squeamish attitude towards everyday bodily functions and waste in Roman society, or if it was merely a cynical form of artistic display, highlighting the contrast between refined art and the mundane realities it depicted, rather than a genuine comfort with filth. Was it cultural acceptance, or artistic irony, that made them portray such messes? The lack of modern plumbing and sophisticated cleaning tools meant that the cleanup was entirely manual, laborious, and incredibly unsanitary. Waste might be swept into a corner or carried out in buckets, eventually to be dumped into the public sewers. Remember those vile depths from Section 13 of The Awful Jobs, but the lingering odors and stains would require persistent effort. The air would remain thick with the unpleasant aromas until fresh air could properly circulate and any lingering dampness evaporated. Beyond the dining room, the entire villa might bear the marks of the party. The gardens, the peristyles, even the entranceways might be littered with remnants, or show signs of drunken revelry. Enslaved servants would likely be working through the day, restoring order to every corner of the house, preparing it for the host's awakening and the resumption of daily life. The cost of this cleanup, in terms of human labor and sheer unpleasantness, was immense. But it was an invisible cost, borne entirely by the enslaved workforce. For the Roman elite, the luxury of indulgence came with the implicit understanding that someone else would handle the repulsive aftermath, allowing them to retreat to their chambers, blissfully unaware of the true extent of the chaos they had left behind. You feel the stickiness beneath your sandals, the pervasive, stomach-churning stench, and the sheer visual chaos of the room around you. You see the broken pottery, the scattered food, and the unmistakable stains. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about their extravagance or their bizarre entertainments. It's about the profound, disgusting reality of their aftermath. Your Roman party experience confirms that behind every facade of luxury and indulgence lay a foundation of considerable mess and unhygienic chaos, the unpleasant price of revelry, all cleaned up by the tireless, invisible hands of exploited labor, ensuring that the morning after the party was often far more brutal than the night itself. Leaving the quiet, disgusting aftermath of a private Roman dinner party, your experience of Roman revelry now shifts dramatically, exploding into the chaotic, vibrant, and often raucous world of public festivals' mass merriment. Forget the exclusive gatherings of the elite. These were communal celebrations, holidays dedicated to gods, military victories, or seasonal changes, throwing open the gates of merriment to the entire city. You quickly learned that Roman fun wasn't just for the rich. It was a loud, boisterous, and sometimes unruly explosion of collective joy, where the streets themselves became the stage for widespread indulgence and communal celebration. It's like being at a never-ending street fair mixed with a massive public holiday, where everyone is letting loose and the rules are a bit relaxed. You find yourself swept up in the throng of a Roman festival, perhaps the Saturnalia, a winter festival honoring Saturn, god of agriculture, or the Lupercalia, an ancient, fertility-focused rite. The usual strictures of Roman society loosen considerably. The streets, typically bustling with purposeful activity, are now packed with citizens of all social classes, mingling, laughing, and celebrating. The air is filled with a cacophony of sound music from flutes and drums, singing, raucous laughter, and the joyous shouts of thousands of revelers. This isn't the refined atmosphere of a private villa. It's a full sensory immersion into collective exuberance. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the sheer scale and importance of these events is that Roman public festivals feriae were numerous and vital to the social and religious life of all citizens, involving large-scale public celebrations with processions, feasts often publicly provided, games, theatrical performances, and a temporary suspension of some social hierarchies and daily routines, encouraging mass merriment and communal bonding. These festivals were crucial for maintaining social cohesion and honoring the gods. Imagine the sheer sensory overload. The smell of roasting meats from public stalls mingles with the aroma of incense, stale wine, and the ever-present human and animal odors. Remember those from Section 3's Hygiene, Filth, and Body Odor. You see people dancing in the streets, perhaps a simple folk dance, or a more ecstatic, uninhibited display. Vendors offer cheap wine and snacks, adding to the festive chaos. Your ears are assaulted by a constant stream of noise street performers, impromptu musicians, and the joyous shouting of the crowd. A particularly quirky tidbit that exemplifies the reversal of social norms during some festivals, especially Saturnalia, is the temporary reversal of roles between masters and enslaved individuals. During this period, enslaved people were often allowed to gamble, feast, and even be waited on by their masters, embodying a brief, symbolic freedom. Imagine your enslaved servants remember them from Section 10's invisible workhorses sitting at your table, being served wine by you, and even offering you instructions, all for a few fleeting days. Historians still argue whether these temporary social reversals during festivals truly provided a valuable psychological release for the lower classes and enslaved populations, safely diffusing social tensions, or if they were primarily a cynical tool of social control by the Roman elite, allowing for a limited, controlled outlet for discontent without threatening the underlying power structures. Was it genuine liberation or clever manipulation? Processions were a common feature. You might see statues of gods carried through the streets, adorned with flowers and offerings, accompanied by priests, musicians, and eager followers. These religious parades were both solemn and festive, a visible manifestation of shared faith and community identity. People would throw flowers, offer prayers, and cheer as the divine figures passed by. Games and athletic contests were also popular during festivals, offering public entertainment that appealed to all classes. Mock battles, wrestling matches, and chariot races, even if on a smaller scale than the Circus Maximus, would draw large, enthusiastic crowds. The gambling, remember, that from Section 9 would certainly be thriving at these events, as people wagered on every outcome. The atmosphere was often one of joyful abandon, bordering on chaos. People drank freely and less diluted than at private parties, perhaps sang loudly, and engaged in boisterous revelry. Petty arguments, drunken brawls, and minor acts of mischief were common, often overlooked by authorities in the spirit of the festival. The usual strictures of Roman law and social decorum were temporarily relaxed, allowing for a collective release of inhibitions. You feel the infectious energy of the crowd, the thrill of mass merriment, and the profound sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. You might find yourself laughing, shouting, and even dancing alongside strangers, swept up in the collective euphoria. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't that they were all private and stuffy. It's that the public festivals were a chaotic, vibrant, and utterly unrestrained display of mass merriment. Your Roman party experience reveals a society that, despite its rigid class structure, knew how to let loose collectively, turning its streets into a riotous, joyous spectacle. A powerful testament to the Roman capacity for both strict order and spontaneous, overwhelming revelry, where the ordinary citizen could temporarily forget the grind of empire and simply revel in the shared joy of the crowd. Having witnessed the raw, communal exuberance of public festivals, your journey through Roman revelry now takes a sharp turn back into the exclusive, often bizarre, world of the ultra-wealthy themed parties' eccentric indulgence. Forget simple dinner parties. The Roman elite, ever eager to outdo each other, would host extravagant, highly specialized banquets designed not just to entertain, but to shock, amaze, and subtly display their limitless wealth, power, and often their peculiar tastes. You quickly learn that for the truly rich, a party wasn't just a meal, it was a theatrical production, a living art installation, where the only limit was the host's imagination and his endless coffers. It's like being at a very exclusive, very strange, and very expensive, immersive theater experience where the theme is often decadence, and the guests are part of the show. You receive an invitation to one such gathering, perhaps from a notoriously eccentric millionaire or a newly rich freedman trying to climb the social ladder. The invitation itself might hint at the theme, or it might be a delightful mystery. As you approach the host's villa, The usual opulence, remember, that from section 1 is amplified, decorated to suit the night's particular extravagance. The air might be filled with unusual scents, or the sounds might be specifically chosen to set a mood. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this extreme elite indulgence is that wealthy Romans famously hosted incredibly elaborate, themed banquets, where food, entertainment, and even the decor were meticulously designed around a specific concept, ranging from mythological scenes to bizarre culinary spectacles, often aiming to shock and outdo rival hosts in displays of opulence and originality. These parties were the pinnacle of Roman excess and conspicuous consumption. Imagine having a dinner party where the main course is served inside a giant, edible, flying bird, or where the waitstaff are dressed as gladiators, but tiny ones. Imagine the theme. Perhaps it's a topsy-turvy party where servants are dressed as masters and masters feign servitude, a dark echo of the Saturnalia role reversal, but for pure amusement, or a seafood fantasy where the dining room is decorated to resemble an underwater grotto with exotic fish swimming in illuminated tanks, and every dish is a different, elaborate preparation of marine life. The attention to detail is astonishing. Every element meticulously planned by the host and his army of specialized enslaved servants. A particularly quirky tidbit about these themed parties is the extreme lengths some hosts would go to create truly bizarre and memorable culinary spectacles. Accounts from Roman writers describe dishes like a whole roasted boar filled with live thrushes that would fly out when carved, or a giant cake shaped like a monster that would bleed wine when cut. Imagine being served a cake, only for it to start bleeding Merlot, and thinking that's impressive. Historians still argue whether the extreme accounts of these eccentric Roman banquets were primarily accurate historical depictions of elite excess, reflecting a genuine taste for the bizarre and grotesque among the super-rich, or if they were largely exaggerated or even fictionalized literary devices used by satirists like Juvenal or Petronius, whose Satyricon is full of such descriptions to criticize the perceived moral decay and vulgarity of their society. Was it real, or just very sharp satire that depicted such over-the-top indulgence? The food, already extravagant. Remember Section 4's sometimes gross dishes would be elevated to an art form of eccentricity. Dishes might arrive disguised as something else entirely, requiring guests to use their wits or their adventurous appetites to discover the true nature of their meal. Exotic birds, wild beasts, and rare fish would be presented in elaborate culinary tableaux, often with accompanying theatrical flourishes. The objective was not just to eat, but to be amazed, perhaps even slightly repulsed, by the host's boundless creativity and wealth. Entertainment, too, would be integrated into the theme. Musicians might play exotic instruments from distant lands. Dancers might perform specific mythological narratives, or actors might stage short plays reflecting the party's chosen concept. For some truly decadent hosts, the entertainment could become even more transgressive, involving explicit performances or even mock gladiatorial combats designed to shock and excite the increasingly inebriated guests. The boundaries of polite society, already fluid at Roman parties, would often completely dissolve in these themed extravaganzas. The conversation would inevitably revolve around the host's display, praising his ingenuity and generosity, while subtly or not so subtly evaluating his taste and comparing his party to others. Social climbing, networking, and the subtle assertion of status were all part of the game, even amidst the most outlandish displays. You recline on your couch, perhaps sipping a particularly rare vintage of spiced wine. your eyes wide with a mixture of amusement, astonishment, and perhaps a touch of revulsion. You see a dish presented that defies explanation, a culinary puzzle designed to confound and impress. The awful truth about Roman parties isn't just about the long hours or the explicit conversations. It's about the pinnacle of elite indulgence, the bizarre and specialized themed parties. Your Roman party experience at this level is a plunge into a world where boundless wealth and eccentric tastes combine to create a theatrical, often grotesque, yet undeniably unforgettable spectacle, a testament to the Roman elite's limitless capacity for revelry and ostentatious display, often blurring the lines between a feast and a performance art piece. After navigating the grand dining rooms, the awkward reclining, the sometimes gross food, the endless diluted wine, the bizarre entertainment, the explicit conversations, the non-existent vomitoria, the illicit gambling, the invisible enslaved labor, the varied roles of women, the disgusting after-party mess, and the eccentric themed banquets, you finally emerge to contemplate the profound and lasting legacy influence on modern socializings. The parties of the Roman Empire, for all their strangeness and excess, were not isolated historical oddities. They established customs, norms, and a very human approach to shared revelry that has, surprisingly, rippled through centuries, subtly shaping the way we gather and celebrate today. You realize that your modern dinner parties, your toasts, even your concept of hospitality, owe an unexpected debt to those ancient Romans. It's like discovering that the very roots of your favorite modern traditions twist back to an ancient, wine-soaked banquet. You reflect on the elements that felt most alien: the reclining posture, the garum on everything, the public vomiting myth that wasn't true. Yet, many core aspects of Roman parties feel strikingly familiar. The idea of a multi-course meal, served over an extended period, designed for conversation and enjoyment, is a concept that persists in formal dining today. The emphasis on intellectual discourse, on witty banter, and on a convivial atmosphere remains central to successful entertaining. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this enduring influence is that many aspects of Roman party culture, particularly the structured multi-course meal, the focus on shared conversation and intellectual discourse, the ceremonial pouring of wine, and the role of entertainment, profoundly influenced later European and thus Western traditions of formal dining and social gatherings, shaping etiquette and expectations for centuries. Their parties set a template. Imagine a formal dinner party you might attend today. The progression from appetizers to main courses to dessert, the careful selection of wines to accompany each dish, the expectation of polite and sometimes not so polite conversation. These are all echoes of the Roman Sina. Even the act of raising a glass in a toast, a small ritual we perform without thinking, has roots in Roman libations to the gods or in a simple gesture of good cheer. A particularly quirky tidbit that shows the subtle shift over time is the Roman emphasis on drinking games or formal symposia after the meal, where guests would drink and debate more seriously. While modern parties might have games, they are rarely as formal or as intrinsically linked to the philosophical debate as the Roman ones. Imagine having to play a drinking game where the forfeit is discussing the meaning of virtue, or quoting a long passage of ancient poetry correctly. Historians still argue whether the apparent decline in the extreme public displays of Roman excess, like themed banquets with bizarre dishes in later centuries, was primarily a result of the moralizing influence of Christianity, which favored temperance and modesty, or if it was more a consequence of the Roman Empire's economic decline. making such lavish displays simply unaffordable for a broader elite? Did faith, or economics, tone down the parties? The importance of the host's hospitality, his meticulous planning, and his desire to impress guests remains a cornerstone of entertaining. The very idea of throwing a party to showcase one's status, connections, and good taste is a direct inheritance from the Roman elite. The emphasis on good food and drink, varied entertainment, and lively conversation as the ingredients for a successful gathering is a timeless recipe that the Romans perfected. Even the darker sides, the gambling, the occasional debauchery, the casual exploitation of labor, though hopefully without the actual presence of enslaved individuals today, find parallels in less savory aspects of modern socializing. The human tendency towards indulgence and the blurring of social boundaries in a festive atmosphere are universal constants. You realize that your own experiences of socializing, from a casual gathering to a formal dinner, carry the faint imprint of those ancient Roman revelries, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the shared laughter over a good meal. These universal human joys were cultivated and refined in the triclinium long ago. The awful truth about Roman parties wasn't that they were inherently awful, it's that they were intensely human, reflecting the very best and occasionally the very worst of a vibrant, complex civilization, laying the enduring foundations for how we celebrate, indulge, and connect with each other, even thousands of years later. Now, as the sounds of ancient revelry fade, and the lingering scents of spiced wine and exotic foods grow quiet, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The grand feasts, the bizarre entertainment, and the vibrant conversations of Roman parties are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a world of ancient indulgence, and now it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the triclinium and the endless flow of ancient wine.